New Mexico Crime Files, a deep dive into the archives, shocking and notorious cases, the arrests and what led to them, and what happened to the suspect. Here are your hosts, Dean Staley and Jessica Garate.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of New Mexico Crime Files. We have some really interesting stories we're going to be reviewing today. I'm Jessica Garate with KRQE, joined by my co-anchor, Dean Staley.
Dean Staley here. Right with you, Jess. I'm ready.
Okay, let's jump into this. This has been just put New Mexico in the national spotlight, and we're talking about the Juan De Onate statues and the controversy it has stirred here in New Mexico, leading to a couple of shootings.
Right. So what's happening in a general sense, and we'll talk about a specific crime here that happened over an Oñate statue, but what's happening in general is that we have these tributes to Juan De Onate, this famous conquistador from Spain, who was in what is now New Mexico in the late 1500s, 1598, right? And the Hispanic community, the Spanish, there are people here in New Mexico, people forget, who trace their lineage all the way back to these days, to the very, very early, contact from the Spanish explorers, right? And so they want to honor him. And they've done, especially in specific parts of northern New Mexico, have built statues, Oñate statues. And this is the conquistador on his horse in all of his glory, right? Well, the context for this, the people need to know this, and I think most New Mexicans, if you grew up here and you know New Mexico, or if you've lived here for any length of time, you understand the conflict inherent between people who want to honor their Spanish heritage and the Native American community, which were brutalized by Juan de Onate and others. This specific case that I think rankles people is when Oñate in 1598, in the winter, late 1598, came to the Acoma Pueblo, this wonderful pueblo west of Albuquerque by maybe an hour outside of Albuquerque. And at the time, insisted on provisions. We need food. I need food for my men and my soldiers. And the Acoma needed their own provisions to survive the winter, and they wouldn't give it to them. There was a battle that broke out. People were killed. Oñate comes back because his soldiers were killed. He had a handful of soldiers, I think, killed in this conflict. Comes back in 1599, right? Early in January, February, with 1,000 men, and they devastate the Acoma Pueblo. They kill 1,000 people, and he orders that every male over the age of 20 or something like that have their leg cut off, have a foot cut off because of this, to punish the Acoma people. So you can understand if you're a Pueblo Native American or you're an Acoma, to see that they're celebrating Juan de Onate is pretty tough to take.
It is, and you had a lot of Indian rights groups come out and say how offensive this is and that they have to pass this statue. And as you just mentioned too, I talked to the state historian, Ryan Martinez, who was saying, when people look at the statue, they either see, their Hispanic culture and the beginning of the Hispanic culture here in New Mexico, or they see something very offensive and they wanted it taken down. And you saw these statues over time. I've covered this several times. Back in 1997, you were mentioning you had someone go and cut off the foot of the statue, right, showing what he had done to their people.
Right. So this is sort of the New Mexico version of this Civil War battle that you see in other parts of the country, where they're honoring maybe a former Civil War general who's up on his horse. And they're saying, well, we need to take that down. And you have two different groups saying, well, that to us represents our history. And the other side, says that absolutely represents oppression to us. So it's easy to understand in that context.
For many people here in Española, the fiesta is a time-honored celebration.
Since 1933, every year people in Española have marched through town, honoring Spanish conquistador Juan de Onate.
The city would appoint the Fiesta Council and be involved in supporting the fiesta and carrying it out every year.
But this year, that won't happen. The city voted unanimously to pull its support of the event because of controversy over Oñate and the celebration.
The Pueblo people are very strongly against Oñate. The people in Española very strongly in favor.
A hero of the Spanish, Native Americans criticize Oñate as a brutal conqueror who cut off the left foot of Native Americans in the 1500s. People have protested events honoring Oñate for years.
We wanted to try and evolve or change the traditions a little.
Mayor Javier Sanchez says the city of Española will bring in a nonprofit to handle the fiestas.
Many citizens of the city were very angry to see the fiesta be changed, and unfortunately, this is their culture. They're very proud of it here.
In spite of opposition from the community, the mayor says this was a much-needed change.
And in the end, I think everybody on the council felt that it would be best that if somebody wanted to preserve the specific traditions the way that they wanted to honor them, that would be best handled outside of the city's purview.
And he's hoping over time the change will be accepted.
I am looking forward to how we can transform who we are in a way that we can celebrate a greater variety of traditions.
Rebecca Atkins, KRQE, News 13.
Things really started to heat up back in 2020 when you saw across the nation different cities, towns taking down statues of Robert E. Lee. We also had the George Floyd situation, which also caused a lot of outrage and protests.
The Black Lives Matter movement right?
During that time in 2020. And so that's where we started seeing protests here against Juan De Onate statues. In different areas of the city, we saw it here in Albuquerque. We saw one, there was a big protest where they took down the obelisk in Santa Fe, and then of course up in Rio Arriba County.
For 20 years, this statue of Don Juan De Onate has stood on the corner of Mountain and 19th Street, right in front of the Albuquerque Museum.
It's placed in such a prominent place, like right on the corner, and it's elevated on a berm.
The statue shows Oñate and other conquistadors leading the Spaniards through New Spain.
The particular statue is part of a public art piece called La Jornada.
On Friday, a group called Janisario Nation created a petition requesting the statue be removed, saying it represents and continues a legacy of colonial violence.
That he represents something that I think is not to be honored.
He was responsible for a lot of brutality and genocide and enslavement of Native people.
And this morning, city crews were out on the corner with power washers, cleaning up after someone vandalized the statue overnight.
It's just costing us money to repair this kind of work.
The vandals spray painted Oñate's feet, face, and chest red and left a message on the sidewalk in front.
It said something like racist murderer.
While some recognize why the statue is considered offensive,
I understand like the Oñate was like not a good person.
Others say enough is enough.
I don't know when this is going to stop. This is 500 years ago. And I think we in New Mexico are living in peace with each other, and why start new problems?
Stephanie Chavez, KRQE News 13.
Right, and so let's bring people into this very specific place. This is Espanola. This is the seat of Rio Arriba County. It is actually one of the very first places that the Spanish settled. It's a wonderfully rich valley. You have the Rio Grande coming down, and you have the Chama River coming down, and that's the confluence of these two rivers. And it's really fertile farmland. And this is where the Spanish, for a time, were settling it. It might have become what is today Santa Fe, but for the fact that they were pushed out actually by the Indians at the time. The Native Americans pushed them back to Santa Fe, which is why Santa Fe is now the capital, right? But still, in that part of New Mexico, this Espanola Valley, you have these families that go way, way back, these Spanish families. And back in 94, they got through state funds, tens of millions of dollars to build the Oñate Monument and Visitor Center in honor of Juan De Onate, this very controversial conquistador. So they build a building and they put one of these statues in front of it, of Oñate on his horse. It's 12 feet tall. It's massive. This is like you'll see in any European city in the center of a traffic circle, one of these massive statues.
Yes.
It's beautiful. It's Oñate in all of his glory, depending on how you see Oñate, right? So that from the very beginning was controversial, and there was and as you said, I think someone cut off the foot of Oñate as a way to say we don't respect this. This is offensive to us, right? So that was just the beginning of this.
This is what he means to us,
right.
and it means so many different things to different people, and it has caused some massive protests, some big fights over what to do with these statues. So back in 2023, protesters and counter-protesters clash over a proposal to reinstall the statue. And it was outside of an Espanola county building. So it brought both groups there. So you had a lot of Indian rights groups, and then you also had a lot of there's a whole group of men who have been fighting for the statue, saying it's part of their Spanish heritage.
Right, and we should just point out, this statue had already been taken down from the Oñate Center and put in hiding, essentially, because it was so controversial. They put it in a county building or warehouse somewhere. No one knew where it was, actually. I mean, they wouldn't even tell the media where they had tucked it away because they didn't want conflict over it. So then you have the county commissioner saying, you know what, we're going to bring it back out and we're going to put it here, not at the Oñate historic building. We're going to put it right here in the middle of Española, next to our county building. So that sparks controversy, and so then they rethink it. There's all this pushback, and the county commissioners say, okay, we're going to take a moment and let's reconsider. So the statue at this point is still in hiding. The plans are to reinstall it, but those plans have been put on hold. So the protest that we're talking about and the crime that we're looking at today was Indian rights groups coming out and celebrating the fact they were doing a prayer, and they were celebrating the fact that the reinstallation, let's call it, of this statue had been delayed.
So we have these groups. Tension is building outside of this county building on what's going to happen with this statue. And a man shows up. He is armed, and there starts to be some clashes. And let's go and take a look at what happened.
Let him go. A chaotic scene as a single gunshot rings out at what started as a peaceful protest in Española. Raymond Naranjo and Nathania Bird were at the protest today when Naranjo captured this video just a few feet away from the shooter.
He was also recorded earlier during the day in hate speech, I guess.
It happened this afternoon around noon outside of a Rio Arriba county office. That's where protesters were voicing continued opposition to the planned reinstallation of a statue of Juan De Onate, the Spanish conquistador known for his massacre of the Acoma people.
Yeah, well, we were there on prayer, and the prayer was interrupted with an attempt on someone's life.
The statue was removed from a different county building in 2020 amid protests around the state over monuments of colonial figures. Rio Arriba County officials had announced a dedication ceremony planned for today, placing the statue in front of the sheriff's office. But last night, the county canceled that event on the sheriff's recommendation, citing safety reasons, though they did not elaborate on those concerns. Protesters still showed up to the site today, giving speeches and leading prayers.
Sheriff, were your deputies at the gathering today?
We did have some deputies on standby, yes, sir.
Were they there at the time of the shooting?
No, sir.
Why not?
I'm not going to take any more questions.
Video shows the man later identified as 23-year-old Ryan Martinez in the green sweatshirt and a Make America Great Again hat, standing in the crowd alongside other counter-protesters. Before video shows protesters trying to kick him out of the area right in front of the sheriff's office.
He was trying to get back into the circle. He was trying to get back in, and they were trying to hold him from coming back in because there was children there. And then that's when the altercation took place.
He jumps over a wall as the group chases after him and tries to grab him before he pulls out a gun from his waistband and fires a single shot before fleeing the scene. Española police later arrested Martinez. Gabe Chavez, KRQE, News 13.
I just remember watching that video. We were sent that video, and it was just stunning. I mean, you're just right there.
The shooting captured on video right there.
It was just incredible. The victim was Jacob Johns. He was taken to the hospital. He was pretty injured. He was in the hospital for more than a month, underwent a bunch of surgeries. He lost his spleen. He was missing part of his liver, his stomach, and his pancreas. He was pretty injured, and you could see just that tension building right up before that shooting. And they had been going back and forth, and that's when Ryan Martinez opens fire, and it's all caught on video.
And to be clear, Jacob Johns is one of, I would call it, the anti-Oñate protesters. They are there celebrating the fact that this monument is not going to come back, at least right away, that it's been delayed. So they're celebrating. They're trying to have a prayer. So the shooter in this case, 23-year-old Ryan Martinez, wearing a MAGA hat, shows up. And there were other conservatives there, I would say, who were part of the MAGA group. We saw at least one other older man in a MAGA hat, right? And they were there, certainly have the right to be there. This is, public space. But we saw later there was clearly video where he was antagonizing the people who were there protesting Oñate. He was getting in their face with the camera, and he was pushing his way through to get to the front. And that's why you see, just by way of explanation for people who have not seen all of the video, that's why you see this group eventually attacking him. They're trying to push him out, right? They're not trying to beat him up at first. They're just trying to push him out, and he keeps trying to work his way back into the group, and they're trying to get him out of there. And then they attack him when they really do. I mean, one of them rips that MAGA hat off of his head. You don't really see that it happens so quickly, but they ripped his hat off, and then he jumps over the wall, and that's when he pulls out his gun and shoots. So just a little bit of context for who these two people are, the victim and the other protester.
Yes, and this is also a guy, this Ryan Martinez, in court, they really tried to explain his intentions. He lives in Edgewood. He drove all the way up north to make sure he's going. He's not from northern New Mexico. He went there. He was armed, which has become a whole nother issue with these protests, because we've seen people showing up to these protests arms here in Albuquerque. It led to a shooting. Yeah. We've had, this was the second one that we had seen that led to a shooting.
Yeah, and just, if I may, a little aside here. So we had a different Oñate statue at a museum here in Albuquerque with the same thing that happened. The protesters come, they're trying to yank down the Oñate statue with ropes, and there are some anti. So these are anti-Oñate protesters. They're protesting the fact that we have an Oñate statue to begin with, right, out in public. And then there are people who are protesting them, right? And one of them is the New Mexico Civil Guard, they call themselves. These are not civil guardsmen. These are not military types, but they're in their military gear. They're holding AR-15 rifles. There's a handful of these people standing.
Protect
and it was never really clear what they were doing, because they didn't keep the statue from being pulled down. Yeah. They didn't keep this other guy who came with a gun and was attacking the protesters, sneaking up behind them and throwing them to the ground. Yeah. And they weren't keeping him from doing damage. And ultimately, when the protesters caught on that this guy is among us and he keeps throwing people to the ground, they went after him. And in that moment, they didn't protect him. So they go attack. And that man who was attacking the protesters had brought a gun as well. He shot one of the people who were attacking him. So this is almost the same dynamic, right? Where you have someone showing up saying, I don't like that you guys are protesting Oñate. I've got a gun and I'm going to make trouble until something happens. Yeah. So
lots of we've been seeing it during that time frame where people just showing up to these protests. They're very, very heated, obviously, and not ending in a great way. So Ryan Martinez was set to face a jury trial on October 7th of 2024 for attempt to commit first-degree murder and many other charges. And that quickly changed when he made a surprise plea before he was going to go to trial. So let's go ahead and look at this story from Bianca Hoops.
He also looks forward to moving on with his life.
Ryan Martinez learned his fate before a jury ever heard his case. In September of last year, protesters and counter-protesters clashed over a proposal to re-erect a statue of the controversial conquistador Juan De Onate outside a county building in Española. Video shows the confrontation turn physical, with protesters pushing Martinez before he pulls out a gun and fires it, hitting and wounding protester Jacob Johns. Prosecutors originally charged Martinez with attempted murder, but his defense attorneys argue that Martinez had no intent of murder.
He always asserted that he was acting in self-defense. He did not want to be involved in a violent encounter that day, and unfortunately that's how it developed.
Martinez was set for trial this week in Rio Arriba County. But just before jury selection was set to begin, he accepted a plea agreement from the district attorney's office, pleading no contest to two charges: aggravated assault and aggravated battery, both with a deadly weapon.
This plea agreement takes off the table attempted murder and dismisses the hate crime allegations that were brought against him.
Martinez was sentenced to 4 years behind bars. A resolution District Attorney Mary Carmack Altuiz calls, quote, a positive step towards putting the tragedy behind us.
And Mr. Martinez definitely hopes that by entering into this no contest plea that he did today, that it brings closure to everybody involved.
Bianca Hoops, KRQE News 13.
I have to say, Jess, I think this was some pretty smart maneuvering on the part of Ryan Martinez and his attorney, facing an attempted first-degree murder charge and pleading to ag assault and ag battery with a deadly weapon. The most important part of that plea is they took the hate crime element of the crime off of that. So he wasn't facing any sort of crime that had to do with being, creating a hate crime. So I thought that was pretty smart. And when Bianca there was saying he got 4 years, he actually was sentenced to 9.5 years. But because it included a firearm enhancement and it was a serious violent offense by New Mexico statute, that means you have to serve a minimum of 4 years on a 9.5-year sentence. So just so we're clear, sometimes people can get out much sooner than that, but because of the serious violent offense, he had to do at least half of it.
And this case still is not over. The victim filed a civil suit against Martinez, and in the suit it was pointed out that back in 2018, Martinez was reportedly questioned by the FBI for making threatening posts online. So this guy has a
years
history,
before this
incident,
Yeah.
a history of doing and kind of provoking these kind of situations. In the lawsuit, John claims Martinez was illegally manufacturing gun parts using a 3D printer and went to the September protests with the intent to engage violence. And I think that's where, you see this case really unfold. No matter what side you're on this, you brought a gun, and when tempers flared, you pulled it out and shot someone. So the civil case was settled. The terms of the settlement are confidential.
I think there might have been, the latest element to this was Jacob John's family sued him. Now Jacob Johns, this is the victim who got shot in the abdomen by Martinez, is now suing the county, saying, and the sheriff of Rio Arriba County, saying, you should have done more to make this a safe place. I got shot in the abdomen by this guy. You knew there would be a conflict. So that's the...
And they're really questioning, what happened to the deputies? You knew they were there, but they weren't there at the time of the shooting, so you knew things were going to be heated, and more should have been done to protect the protesters.
And you saw that in one of our stories when we asked the sheriff point blank, said, well, didn't you have deputies here? And he said, yeah, we did. Well, why weren't they here when this happened? And the sheriff said, I'm not answering any more questions, right?
Yeah.
He was done talking at that point. So that's clearly an element that the family wants to go after the county and say, you're responsible for this. Yeah. So I'm not sure that we've seen the end of these kinds of conflicts, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it still goes unresolved. There's still controversy surrounding the obelisk in Santa Fe and what to do with that. It's gone back and forth. Should they repair it, put it back in the plaza? There was a time where it was agreed upon, just put it in a museum. Should they just go into a museum and share both sides of the history and what happened to both sides?
Another controversial monument. We should also say, we're talking about the conflict between the Spanish population, Hispanic population in New Mexico, and Native Americans. Anglos have their same version of this, have their own version of this with Kit Carson, right? He was, this storied frontiersman, but he was also part of the U.S. Army. He was also involved in Indian raids where they would raid Indian villages. So he's a controversial figure that it's exactly the same thing, that depending on what your perspective is, you see this man in very different light.
Yes, absolutely. And down in Las Cruces, they even changed the high school's name because it was Oñate High School, and they went as far as changing it.
Right. So this is not by any means just a comprehensive list, but we have the Oñate statue in Rio Arriba County, which they've still not decided what to do with, I don't think, permanently, now that they had a shooting over it. You have the obelisk at the very center of Santa Fe in the plaza that was torn down by protesters. The same thing. It's in a warehouse somewhere, and they're looking at it, and they're not sure. They don't think they can put it back because it's too damaged by the protesters, but should we put something back to represent it, or should it go in a museum? So that's still unresolved. And I don't think, and as you mentioned, they changed the high school name in Las Cruces, Kit Carson Park. They changed the name of Kit Carson Park here in Albuquerque, which at one point was not controversial at all. Or maybe I should say at one point, people didn't understand how controversial it was, because maybe there was always people who saw Kit Carson Park and thought, no, I'm a Native American, that offends me. So maybe we're at a point where we have more understanding of each other as New Mexicans.
Absolutely. And trying to get to the bottom of this, I had reached out and spoke with the state historian, Rob Martinez, and I'm like, what do you think should happen? We want we need to tell our history. It's not always pretty. There's ugly parts of our history. How do we remember that? And how do we, also make both sides comfortable and feel like they both have been seen? And, and he really thought that he thought the best solution was putting them in museums where they belong, giving the full context and history of both sides. And he thought that's where they should go. But again, you still have this battle over where should we put them, and people fighting, wanting those statues back out in a public space.
Yeah, and I will say this too, Jess. I hope that we get to a place where people leave the weapons home when it comes to protests.
Yes.
I do not. We've seen this twice, and we've seen this in other parts of the country, where people come to a protest that they know is going to be a protest, and they bring a firearm, and they're intentionally antagonizing the protesters. And it's almost like they're begging for some sort of conflict so they can pull out their weapon and shoot somebody. That's happened. We've had twice here, just in New Mexico. We've had it happen a couple of other times in other parts of the country. So I would love to get to the point where we have either stricter laws about, if it's a demonstration that doesn't, this is a place maybe that it's firearm-free zone. I don't know. I don't know how to solve it, because then you get gun rights people saying, well, I should be able to take my gun, out in public. I get that. So I don't know how you solve it, but that, to me, is a troubling part of this entire dynamic, where we understand the sides, but how we engage matters too. Not just what the issues are, but if we're going to engage over these issues, how do we do that in a peaceful way?
And I think even here at the Albuquerque protest that we saw, where they were tearing down the statue, and you had, as we mentioned, the civil guard, they come, they're armed, they have their weapons, showing. And so then the protesters are immediately already feel that we're, wanted the statue taken down. They were saying we were already fearful because we're like, why are they showing up with guns? We don't have guns. So it's just caused this really divide that becomes a dangerous situation. And we're lucky that we haven't seen people die at these protests, but people have been badly injured. Right, and some protesters, when they see all these guys there with their rifles and their battle rattle, I mean, they're in their they're not military, but they're in military gear. Some of them are definitely intimidated and think, oh, that's scary. And others, I think, rise to that, and you're sort of amping up the pressure. You're amping up the temperature where they're like, hey, you've got a gun, you think you're tough. So then you get to this weird place, And it escalates quickly, as we have seen in all of these cases. So. Yeah.
Well, Dean, I think that wraps up another New Mexico Crime Files for today.
It does. And we hope you join us next time for our next edition of New Mexico Crime Files.